Welcome everyone, I'm Stephen and I'll be your host for today's webinar on preparing for an ISO 13485 compliance audit. So if you're already here, you know that ISO 13485 compliance isn't just a regulatory requirement, it's essentially the backbone of quality, safety and market access in the medical device industry. But when it comes to an ISO 13485 audit, a lot of manufacturers find themselves unprepared, overwhelmed, or scrambling at the last minute. So if we get real for a moment, nearly 40% of medical device manufacturers fail their initial ISO 13485 audit. Now that's almost half, and the biggest reasons are for things like documentation gaps, procedures that exist on paper but aren't being followed in practice, weak risk management, which is the failure to demonstrate how risks are identified, evaluated and controlled, lack of leadership involvement, when compliance is seen as just a regulatory hurdle instead of a company-wide commitment. Failing an audit can lead to correct or costly corrective actions that stall production and drain your resources, regulatory delays that block your ability to sell in key markets, and loss of business opportunities if customers lose confidence in your quality management system. But with that being said, you don't have to be part of that statistic. Companies that pass their audits first time aren't necessarily the biggest or most well-funded. They're the ones that prepare early, embed compliance into their daily operations, and treat ISO 13485 as a quality-driven strategy. And that's exactly what we're going to cover today. By the end of this session, you'll have a practical, step-by-step roadmap for audit success, including what an ISO 13485 audit actually involves, what auditors look for and what they expect from you, how compliance requirements differ across major markets like the EU, the US and the UK, the most common mistakes that cause companies to fail their audits and how to prevent them, and finally, best practices to streamline the audit process so you're not just compliant but confident and prepared. And as always, if you have any further questions following today's webinar, you can drop them in the chat below or email them directly to us using the email address at the side, ridian@ridianresourcehub.com, and we'll respond to any and all questions received after today's session. So let's get started. First, we will begin by looking at a breakdown of exactly what happens in an ISO 13485 audit and why it matters for you. Okay, so what is an ISO 13485 audit and why does it matter? If you manufacture medical devices, quality isn't just about priority, it's a regulatory requirement. ISO 13485 is the internationally recognised quality management system standard that ensures manufacturers consistently meet regulatory, customer and safety expectations. But the reality is that having a QMS on paper isn't enough. Regulators and certified bodies need proof that your processes aren't just documented, but also fully implemented, fully effective, and continuously maintained. And that's where an ISO 13485 audit comes in. So what happens in a 13485 audit? The audit is conducted by a certification body, which is an external organisation that assesses whether your QMS meets ISO 13485 standards. Passing this audit isn't all just about getting a certificate to hang on the wall. In many markets, ISO 13485 certification is essential for demonstrating compliance before placing your medical devices on the market. If you pass, you receive an ISO 13485 certificate proving that your company follows internationally recognised quality standards for medical device manufacturing, has a robust system in place for risk management, product traceability and regulatory compliance, that your company meets the expectations of regulators, customers and business partners. But if you're not prepared, then an audit can very quickly become very costly. Now, what happens when companies aren't ready? If we look at an example that we came across very recently, a medical device manufacturer who developed implantable cardiovascular devices was preparing to launch in the EU. Now, they assumed they were ready for their ISO 13485 audit, but when auditors reviewed their documentation and reviewed their procedures, they found two critical non-conformities. The first was their risk management documentation. Their risk analysis didn't align with ISO 14971, which is the global standard for medical device risk management. Key risks were not properly assessed, weren't properly mitigated or documented. And number two was their post-market surveillance procedures. They lacked a structured process for monitoring device performance and reporting safety concerns, which is a requirement under both ISO 13485 and EU MDR. And the result was that their ISO 13485 certification was delayed by 6 months. Now, this led to millions in lost revenue from missed sales opportunities, frustrated investors, competitors gaining an advantage while they fixed their internal compliance issues, and regulatory delays essentially derailed their entire business strategy. And that brings us nicely to why does ISO 13485 compliance matter? When it's done right, 13485 compliance is about ensuring market access, reducing risk. A compliant QMS minimises quality issues, it minimises recalls and regulatory interventions. It builds trust. Regulators, customers and business partners rely on ISO 13485 certification as proof that your products meet the highest standards. Companies that embed ISO 13485 into their daily operations create a scalable, resilient quality system that supports long-term success. So, now that we've covered why ISO 13485 audits are crucial, we'll take a closer look at how compliance requirements vary across major markets, namely the EU, the US and the UK, and what that means for your audit preparation. Okay, so ISO 13485 compliance across key markets. We have established that ISO 13485 is a regulatory necessity, but here we'll discuss how things can get a little bit complicated. So, ISO 13485 is recognised worldwide, but how it fits into regulatory approvals varies by region. If your goal is to sell medical devices in multiple markets, it's key to understand how ISO 13485 integrates with local regulations. Otherwise, you could find yourself with a certified quality management system that still doesn't meet market-specific requirements. So, we're going to break it down market by market. So first up, ISO 13485 and CE marking in the European Union. So if you're planning to sell in the EU, ISO 13485 certification is crucial. So while the certification and the EU MDR are separate frameworks, the MDR requires manufacturers to have a quality management system that aligns with ISO 13485. Now, this matters because notified bodies which assess medical devices for CE marking will check your ISO 13485 compliance as part of the conformity assessment process. If you're not ISO 13485 certified, your path to CE marking becomes significantly harder, as you'll need to prove QMS QMS compliance through other more complex means. MDR also imposes stricter post-market surveillance and risk management requirements, both of which are built into ISO 13485. So having 13485 certified QMS makes compliance much smoother. So what this means for you is if you're entering the EU market, you need ISO 13485 compliant QMS as the foundation for CE marking. Without it, your approval process becomes slower and much more complicated. So next is ISO 1345 and FDA compliance in the United States. So unlike the EU, the FDA doesn't officially require ISO 1345 certification. Instead, it has its own quality management regulation, QSR, under 21 CFR Part 820, which outlines similar but not identical quality management requirements. With that being said, recently, the FDA has been moving towards harmonization with ISO 13485 through its Quality Management System Regulation QMSR initiative. So this means if your QMS is ISO 13485 certified, you're already covering most FDA QSR requirements. The transition to QMSR will make ISO 13485 even more aligned with FDA expectations, and for manufacturers selling in both the US and the EU, using ISO 13485 as your QMS foundation will streamline compliance across both markets. So if you're targeting only the US, ISO 13485 isn't a strict requirement, but aligning with it helps simplify your FDA compliance process. If you're targeting both the US and the EU, an ISO 13485 based QMS will reduce a lot of redundant work. So moving on to last but not least, ISO 13485 and UKCA marking in the United Kingdom. Since Brexit, the UK has introduced its own medical device regulatory framework, which requires manufacturers to obtain UKCA marking instead of CE marking. But ISO 13485 still remains the standard for QMS compliance in the UK. The MHRA continues to recognise ISO 13485 as the gold standard for medical device quality systems. And even though the UK is moving away from EU MDR, 13485 certified QMS still plays a central role in UKCA approvals. So if you already comply with 13485 for EU MDR, your transition to UKCA will be smoother. If you're entering UK markets, ISO 13485 remains essential. The regulatory framework is shifting, but your ISO 13485 certification will continue to be a key part of UKCA compliance. So ultimately, the bottom line is 13485 is global, but compliance is local. And what I mean by that is, whilst ISO 13485 is internationally recognised, how it integrates into regulatory approvals varies by market. In the EU, 13485 is a critical requirement for CE marking under MDR. In the US, it's not mandatory, but aligning with ISO 13485 simplifies FDA compliance, and soon it will be even more relevant under the FDA's QMSR initiative. In the UK, 13485 remains the standard for medical device QMS compliance, even as UKCA marking evolves. So if you're planning to sell in multiple regions, you need to do more than just comply with 13485. You need to ensure your QMS also aligns with market-specific regulations like EU MDR, UKCA, and FDA QSR. So now that we've covered the global compliance landscape, let's talk about something just as important, which is the biggest challenges companies face during ISO 13485 audits, and most importantly, how to avoid them. Okay, so overcoming common challenges in ISO 13485 audits. ISO 13485 audits are thorough and highly detailed. Even well-prepared companies can run into unexpected roadblocks. But the biggest challenges aren't just about the regulations, they come down to how well your systems are implemented in practice. So we're going to take a look at 3 of the most common reasons companies struggle with ISO 13485 audits, and more importantly, how to avoid them. First up are documentation gaps, the fastest way to fail an audit. If there's one thing auditors always scrutinise, it's documentation. ISO 13485 is built on traceability, meaning every quality-related process, risk assessments, design history files, supplier agreements, corrective actions, post-market surveillance data must all be properly documented, consistent, and easily retrievable. So where companies get this wrong is where their procedures don't match actual practices. So SOPs say one thing, but daily operations say another. Poor version control. Multiple documents or multiple document versions exist, but it's unclear which one is the latest. Missing training records. There's no clear proof that employees have been trained on quality procedures. And slow retrieval. An auditor asks for a specific record and no one can find it quickly. How you can fix this? So, before your audit, conduct an internal documentation audit. Now, this audit will be to ensure that all required records are complete, up to date, and well organised. Verify the procedures align with actual company practices. Confirm that everyone knows where to find critical documents when asked. If an auditor requests a record and you can't retrieve it quickly, that's a red flag. So a well-maintained document control system eliminates this risk. Number 2 is weak risk management. ISO 13485 is also about anticipating and mitigating risks throughout the product lifecycle. That's why ISO 14971 compliance is a core part of the audit. So where companies get this wrong is where risk management is treated as a one-time document rather than an ongoing process. They have no clear connection between risk assessment and post-market surveillance. Risk files aren't updated when new safety data emerges. They lack a structured system for tracking and responding to adverse events or customer complaints. Now, auditors want to see risk management in action, not just paperwork from 10 years ago. They expect manufacturers to track real-world device performance through post-market surveillance, update risk assessments based on new data, product modifications, and customer feedback, and have structured complaint handling processes that feed directly into risk management updates. So the fix for this is to make risk management a continuous process, not just a check-the-box exercise. Schedule regular risk reviews, integrate real-world data into risk analysis, and ensure that any identified risks are actively managed, not just documented and forgotten. Number 3 is lack of leadership involvement. A compliant QMS isn't just the responsibility of the quality or the regulatory teams. Top management, leadership, must actively be involved. Auditors don't just want to see that leadership knows about ISO 13485. They want proof that leadership are reviewing the QMS performance regularly, that leadership are setting measurable quality objectives that align with the business strategy. They are making compliance-driven decisions, not just reacting to audit findings. And where companies often fail here is where executives are disengaged from compliance efforts. They leave everything to the quality team or to the regulatory team. Leadership can't explain how quality metrics impact the business strategy. And there's no evidence of management review meetings or quality-driven data or quality-driven decision-making. Now, a fix for this issue is to schedule a pre-audit leadership review to ensure management is prepared to discuss quality objectives and performance metrics, explain how compliance is monitored at the executive level, demonstrate a commitment to continuous improvement. So when leadership is actively involved, it sets the tone for the entire organisation, and auditors really like to see this. So how you can stay ahead of these challenges that we've discussed. Essentially, the companies that pass their audits with minimal issues are the ones that keep documentation well organised and up to date. They treat risk management as a dynamic, ongoing process and ensure leadership is actively involved in quality and compliance. Now, every single one of these challenges is preventable, but only if you take a proactive approach. So let's move on to the best practices, and that will set you up for a smooth, successful audit. Okay, so best practices for a seamless ISO 13485 audit. So passing an audit is about preparation, it's about communication and making compliance part of your daily operations. Companies that approach audits with a proactive strategy, they strengthen their overall quality systems. So to set yourself up for success, number one would be to start preparing early. By early, I'm talking 6 months before the order. A last minute rush to gather your documents, to train your employees, to fix process gaps, essentially just set yourself up for failure. You need the time, and you need the time to conduct a gap analysis, which identifies missing or outdated documentation, to fix non-conformities, address weaknesses before an auditor flags them, and to train your team. You need to ensure that everyone understands their compliance responsibilities. So the best approach is to treat your internal audit like a real audit. Run through your processes as if an external auditor were assessing them. If you find gaps, fix them. Fix them now rather than during the actual audit. Number two, engage with your auditor before the official audit. Too many companies take a passive approach. They wait until the audit begins before speaking to their certification body. And the problem with this is it opens the door to misaligned expectations, to missing documentation, and to last minute surprises, which will ultimately delay your certification. So reach out early. Ask auditors what their specific focus areas will be. Check for regulatory updates. Have there been any changes to ISO 13485 or related standards that might impact your audit? Request a pre-assessment. Some auditors offer informal reviews to identify potential issues before the formal audit begins. So the more clarity you have up front, the smoother your audit process will be. Number three, train your team. And that means everybody, not just regulatory staff. Auditors interview employees to assess whether compliance is understood across all departments. So if only your quality and regulatory teams can answer audit questions, again, that's another red flag. Every employee involved in manufacturing should understand quality procedures. Testing and validation teams should know how their work ties into compliance. Even customer support should be able to explain how complaints feed into post-market surveillance. And if an auditor asks someone about standing operating procedures and they hesitate or they give conflicting answers, that's another issue. A well-trained team ensures a smoother audit. Number four, treat compliance as an ongoing process. ISO 13485 certification is about maintaining those standards every day. Auditors want to see that compliance as part of your company culture, not just something you focus on once a year. So, how you can show continuous improvement. Regularly review quality objectives. Are you meeting your compliance goals? Track performance metrics. Are there any trends in CAPAs? Any trends in complaints, non-conformities? Use past audits to improve. Don't just fix the issue. Prevent the issue from reoccurring. Companies that embed compliance into their daily operations have far less stress when audit time comes around. So the key takeaway from this section is a proactive approach leads to success. If you want a smooth and delay-free ISO 13485 audit, focus on these areas. Start preparations early. 6 months ahead gives you time to address issues. Engage with auditors before the audit. Ask about focus areas and recent updates. Train your entire team. Everyone should understand their roles. And build compliance into daily operations. Don't just treat it as a one-time event. Companies that follow these steps are building a strong and efficient QMS long term. Up next, we'll go over some of the most frequently asked questions by you about ISO 13485 audits. Okay, so before we wrap up, we'll go over some of the most common questions about ISO 13485 certification as asked by you. So these are the issues that tend to cause the most confusion for manufacturers. So understanding them now can help you avoid unnecessary delays later. First question up, how long does ISO 13485 certification take? So the short answer, it depends. On average, the certification process takes between 6 and 12 months, but that timeline can vary based on a few key factors. If your company already has a well-structured quality management system that closely aligns with ISO 13485, the process can move quickly. If there are gaps in documentation, gaps in process controls or your risk management, you may need to spend extra time correcting non-conformities before certification can be granted. If an auditor identifies significant issues, you could be looking at additional delays, especially if a follow-up audit is required. So the best way to stay on schedule is to start early. If you take time to identify compliance gaps in advance and correct them before the audit begins, you'll significantly increase your chances of passing on the first attempt. Okay, next question. What happens if we fail our ISO 13485 audit? So a failed audit doesn't mean you can't get certified. It simply means there are non-conformities that need to be corrected before certification can be granted. When this happens, your auditor will issue a report detailing the specific issues that they found. Some non-conformities are minor and they can be resolved quickly with simple documentation updates or small refinements in your processes. Others are more significant and they may require corrective actions. So if your auditor identifies major non-conformities, your certification body will likely require a follow-up audit to confirm that the issues have been addressed. So the key here is to move fast, work closely with your auditor, resolve the issues as efficiently as possible and ensure that every corrective action is well documented. If you can demonstrate to them that your organisation takes compliance seriously and is committed to continuous improvement, you'll be in a much stronger position when it's time for reassessment. So, next question. Do we need ISO 13485 certification if we only sell in the US? Technically, no. ISO 13485 is not a formal requirement for medical device manufacturers selling in the US. The FDA has its own quality regulation system or quality system regulation under 21 CFR Part 820, which outlines similar but separate quality management requirements. With that being said, many manufacturers still choose to get ISO 13485 certified for a few reasons. First, the FDA is in the process of aligning requirements or its requirements with ISO 13485 through the introduction of the QMSR. Now, once this transition is complete, compliance with ISO 13485 will cover most, if not all, FDA quality requirements. Second, if your long-term business strategy includes selling in international markets, 13485 certification is an advantage. In many regions, including the EU, Canada and the UK, it's a huge requirement for market access. So getting certified now can make future expansions much, much easier. Finally, how often do we need to renew our ISO 13485 certification? So after passing your 13485 certification or you're passing your initial audit, you'll be subject to annual surveillance audits to ensure you're maintaining compliance. Every 3 years, you'll need to undergo a recertification audit. They'll look at whether your processes have improved, how you're handling non-conformities, whether your post-market surveillance efforts are effective. If issues arise during these audits, corrective actions may be required to maintain certification. And this is why compliance needs to be treated as an ongoing process, not just as something you focus on right before an audit. Companies that embed ISO 13485 principles into their daily operations have a much easier time maintaining certification over the long term. Okay, and final question. Got time for just one more. What's the most common mistake that leads to audit failure? One of the biggest mistakes companies make is assuming that compliance is just about having the right documentation. While documentation is essential, auditors are also looking for evidence that your quality management system is actually being followed in daily operations. If employees aren't properly trained, if production and quality processes don't match what's written in your SOPs, or if leadership isn't actively engaged in oversight quality, auditors want to see the compliance as part of your company's culture. Quality should be integrated into every level of the organisation. Okay, so hopefully the answers provided are useful. If you had any questions surrounding what we've discussed, if you want to be fully prepared for your ISO 13485 audit right now, these are the steps that you can take. You can download our ISO 13485 audit preparation ebook and guide from our website using the link on your screen. These resources include practical steps and compliance strategies to help you streamline your audit process. You can subscribe for regulatory updates. ISO standards and market regulations evolve, and staying informed will ensure that your QMS remains up to date. And if you need expert guidance, reach out to us. We specialise in helping companies navigate all kinds of regulatory landscapes, and we'd love to support you through your audit with success. And remember, if you have any additional questions following today's webinar, you can email them directly to us at ridian@ridianresourcehub.com. We are here to help. And if there's one final thing I can ask from you, if you're watching today from our YouTube channel, please do me the favour, like and subscribe. Aside from that, thank you for joining me today. I hope you found today's session useful. I hope it's given you valuable insights into an ISO 13485 compliance and how to prepare for a successful audit. So that's it from me. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting you for today's session. And as always, stay informed, stay compliant, and we'll see you next time.